It was a gray, breathless morning over Wrenfield's quiet lakefront. Officer Evelyn Hart walked her usual beat, boots tapping on damp boards, the kind of calm shift that never makes the news. Then, out of the fog, a soaked German Shepherd pup clamped onto her pant leg and tugged hard, as if begging her to understand. She followed without knowing why, and within minutes, she uncovered a secret the whole town had tried to bury beneath the silence of the pier. Us. The lake wore a shawl of silver fog that morning, and the town of Wrenfield moved like it had arthritis. Pier planks creaked, gulls muttered, and the water took its time breathing against the posts. Officer Evelyn Hart walked the empty boardwalk with a thermos cooling in her hand and a weight in her chest she didn't discuss with anyone. Her beat had always been quiet at sunrise. Lately it felt too quiet, like a room after news you don't want to hear. Her radio crackled without saying much. A distant voice, a hum, then static. She tapped it and kept going past the shuttered bait shop, the chained Ferris wheel from a summer long gone, and a row of benches still beaded with dew. Her mind wandered where it always did, to the partner she had lost and the clean square on the wall where his photograph used to hang before the department quietly took it down for repairs. She didn't argue. She learned not to. At the edge of the old marina, a small sound cut sideways across the fog. Not a cry, not a gull. It was closer, damp, impatient. She turned. A little German Shepherd puppy clambered up from the slick ladder, paws skidding on wet wood. Its coat was spiky with lake water, ears too big for its head, eyes dark as bottle glass. It trotted right to her and, without ceremony, bit the cuff of her pant leg. "Easy," Evelyn said, more to herself than the dog. She gave a gentle shake to free her hem. The puppy tugged again, stronger this time, then released and scampered ahead a few steps. It looked back at her with the grave focus of a creature who has already decided what you will do. Her radio gave one last burst of hash, then died to a thin mosquito whine. She raised it to her mouth, tried dispatch, got nothing. The fog thickened in the gap between the piers, turning distance into guesswork. Evelyn checked the safety on her sidearm and the battery on her flashlight, then followed because not following would sit with her all day, and because sometimes your feet answer before your doubts do. The puppy moved like it had a thread tied to her, darting ahead and pausing at corners to make sure she kept up. It led her past the new slips toward the condemned end of the wharf, where the warning tape flapped like tired bunting. Pier 7 was down there. The old freight landing no one bothered to fix because arguing about it was cheaper than repairing it. She stepped over a fallen sawhorse, boards groaning under her weight. The smell of old fish, oil, and cold iron thickened the deeper she went. "Where are you taking me, kid?" she said. The puppy's tail gave a single swipe, businesslike. It nosed the edge of a plank, whining low, then darted along a narrow catwalk that hugged the pilings. Evelyn followed, hand on the rail, boots slick on the algae sleeving the wood. Beneath her, the lake knocked softly, an old man clearing his throat. Halfway down the catwalk, she saw it. A thin ribbon of sheen dancing above the black water, rainbowed where the light found it. Oil. She swept her beam across the boards. A faint smear crossed them, the kind made by something heavy dragged by someone in a hurry. The smear disappeared under a heap of coiled rope and a busted lobster pot. The puppy dug at the rope with frantic little paws. Evelyn knelt, moved the coils aside, and found a scrap trapped beneath. A wallet-size photograph, its corners crisped by heat as if it had been through a small, mean fire. She picked it up carefully. A man in a security uniform looked back at her, squinting into sunlight her morning didn't have. His smile was the polite kind, duty first, no teeth. The name on the tag was blurred by ash, but the jawline yanked at her memory like a snagged hook. "You have got to be kidding me," she whispered. The puppy pressed against her knee, warm and trembling. Evelyn slid the photo into her pocket and took another look at the drag mark. It pointed toward the far end of Pier 7, to the shadowed square where the planks gave way to an iron hatch she'd nearly forgotten existed. Last she'd heard, the maintenance crew had locked it after a storm warped the hinges. No one used the service tunnel anymore. No one was supposed to. She tried the radio again. The only answer was the small sound of her own breath in the tinny speaker. Far off, a gull complained and quieted. She listened harder. Under the deck, in the throat of the pier, something dripped with metronome patience. Between drips, she caught another sound, a soft, metallic rasp, as if a key had skittered across steel. The hair along her arms rose in a slow wave. The puppy stretched its neck and whined at the hatch, pawing the seam as if the boards themselves had a heartbeat. Evelyn wrapped her fingers around the cold ring handle and gave it a test pull. It didn't move. She braced a boot, pulled again. This time the ring shivered but held. Whoever had locked it meant for it to stay that way. She straightened, flexed her sore hand, and aimed her flashlight into the seam. A pair of tiny eyes shone back for a blink, not human, not dog. A rat darted away into blackness. The puppy barked, sharp and angry for once, then leaned its whole weight against her shin as if lending her courage it could not possibly know she needed. "All right," she said. "We'll do it your way." She scanned the deck for leverage, spotted a rusted pry bar wedged under a length of loose plank, and worked it free. The bar came up with a cough of nails. She set its hooked end into the ring and leaned in. The hatch groaned like an old judge. On the third try, the lock surrendered with a pop that rang metal against water and rolled out into the fog. Cold air climbed from the opening, smelling of wet stone and old electricity. Her light found a ladder, wet and slick. She tested the first rung with her heel and descended 2 steps, careful, slow. The puppy peered over, ears pitched forward, then did a ridiculous thing and hopped onto the first rung, front paws splayed, back paws scrabbling, determined to go where she was going. She scooped it up under one arm, tucked it against her vest, and went down the rest of the way. At the bottom, the tunnel leveled into a narrow walkway, with cables shouldered along the walls and puddles that took her footprints like testimony. The oil sheen was thicker down here, a dull rainbow sliding at the edges of her light. The dripping stopped. The tunnel listened. Somewhere ahead, a small metallic tick answered the beat of her pulse. She followed the smear to a corner where the walkway widened into a low chamber under the pier. The lake spoke through the boards above in a heavy hush. In the corner, half hidden by a tarp, sat a steel case the size of a toolbox, pitted with age. A padlock hung fat and recent from its clasp. The puppy wriggled out of her hold and planted both paws on the case, quiet now, as if they had arrived exactly where they were meant to. Evelyn thumbed the lock with her glove, then looked at the pry bar in her other hand. No backup, no clean report later, no one to explain why she had listened to a small wet dog on a foggy morning. She set the bar and took a breath so long it pushed the ache from her chest. Metal shrieked, the lock jumped, and the case yawned open an inch. Inside, something shifted and clicked, like the throat of a camera deciding whether to remember. Evelyn lifted the lid the rest of the way and stared at what lay inside. At the thing that would not belong to any quiet shift and could not be explained away by a note in a logbook. The puppy laid its chin on the rim of the case and looked up at her, as if to say, Now you see. Inside the steel case lay a battered digital camera wrapped in a rag, 3 memory cards rubber-banded together, and an ID clipped to a cracked lanyard. The lanyard had turned green at the clasp. The card was clean. Evidence Unit sat in block letters over a photo of a man in his 30s, with a steady look that didn't apologize for anything. The name at the bottom didn't blur here. Jason Hale. Evelyn felt a slow tug in her chest, the kind you feel when a song you haven't heard in years finds you from a passing car. Jason wasn't a rumor to her. He had occupied the desk across from her once upon a time. Careful with his words, careless with his lunches. The department had buried him under a memorial post and a wreath by the lobby flag after the warehouse blast. They held a short service. They told the story you tell when you need to be done with it. She put the ID back into the case, like it might break the air. The camera was old enough to whir when it woke. The screen took its time. When the menu finally blinked alive, a thumbnail grid waited. Timestamps from last year, dates clustered around the week of the fire. She scrolled with her thumb, felt the puppy press against her calf like a heartbeat. In the echo-wet tunnel, the little click of the wheels sounded like a nail being counted. She opened the most recent clip. The lens pointed down at Boots walking fast, then bobbed up to a row of steel doors in the evidence bay. The room looked like 100 nights of overtime. Jason's voice whispered low and close to the mic, the way you talk when you're not sure which wall knows your name. "Hale, midnight run," he said with a tired half-laugh. "If I'm wrong, this stays on the card. If I'm right, I won't get to explain it." The frame swung to a rolling cart draped with a vinyl cover. Jason pulled the cover back. Under it sat a brushed metal case stenciled with a number and a warning nobody reads until it's too late. "Transferred last week," he said. "No log update. That's not a glitch. That's a hand." He set the camera on a shelf and worked the latches. The angle went crooked, but she saw enough. A packing nest of foam, a tidy layer of thumb drives taped together in bricks, labels stripped. A single manila envelope with the flap unsealed. Jason's hand stayed steady. His voice didn't. "Rowan signed this chain of custody. Captain says we're clearing backlog. Captain doesn't look at me when he says it." Bootsteps came from out of frame. The camera caught a sliver of a shoulder, a sleeve with an insignia she knew like the smell of the break room. A calm voice said, "You're not on schedule, Hale." The clip juddered to black, then leapt to a new file on its own. She opened it with a finger that shook despite how hard she told it not to. The second clip looked like the back alley along the river, a block from the station. The camera was at hip level, peering between crates toward an idling van at the curb. A figure in a reflective jacket took the metal case from someone she couldn't see and lifted it like it weighed less than it did. The reflective strip caught a street light and flared into a logo, a lightning bolt threaded through a circle. She had seen that bolt on orange hard hats, city contracts, and utility trucks that always seemed to have permission to be where she could not go. The camera swung, her stomach swung with it, and the clip ended in a smear of motion and a cough of breath. Evelyn felt the tunnel tilt. She steadied herself with a hand on the damp wall. Above them, the lake thudded once against the pier like a closed fist on a door. The puppy gazed up at her face, studying it, then put both paws on the rim of the case again, as if to insist that everything she needed was already here. "All right, Jason," she said softly into the tunnel. "I'm listening." The third clip was shorter. Jason's voice came without a picture for 2 long seconds, a sound check you make in the dark to know you're still a body. "If I vanish, check Pier 7, he whispered, "under the hatch. I can't carry this around town. The camera found his face for the briefest fraction. He looked the way a man looks when the thing he has to do is ahead of him and the thing he wants behind him. He lifted a dog tag from under his shirt and slid it off the chain. "For Rex," he said. The image cut. The screen went to the square grid. The tunnel exhaled like a tired animal. Evelyn turned the camera off. She put the cards back in the case and the case under her arm. She slipped the ID into her breast pocket where it hit her ribs with the weight of a coin you'd never spend. She reached for the ladder, then paused, listening with the part of herself no academy teaches. The drip had returned somewhere to her left, but the rhythm had changed. It wasn't water now, it was feet. A slow crossbeam creak answered a second later from above. From the boardwalk side, from the place where the fog made a person into a rumor until they decided to be something else. The puppy's ears flattened. A low growl quivered like a string. She raised the pry bar without thinking about whether a bar is any answer to a gun. She counted 3 heartbeats and killed the beam of her flashlight. The tunnel went to velvet. In the dark, sound built bones and muscle. Someone was moving above the hatch, boots scraping metal ring, breath working with a soft hitch the way a man with a bad shoulder breathes when he doesn't want anyone to hear it. Evelyn set the case down without a clink. She moved to the shadow under the ladder and let her eyes learn the dark. The puppy pressed itself against her shin, hot and humbling, and she covered its shoulders with her palm until the growl soaked back into its throat. The hatch shifted. A hairline seam of winter light opened, painting a narrow stripe across the wet floor. A hand came through, feeling for the ladder, wide palm, scar at the base of the thumb where a new officer once cut himself on a fence. The hand withdrew. A whisper lowered into the hole, a man talking to a phone he had cupped against his chest. She couldn't make the words, but she knew the cadence. Report without reporting. Here without being here. She stepped back, the puppy stepping with her, and let whoever it was make the next mistake. The hatch lowered again with careful courtesy, then settled into place with a kiss of metal. Silence followed, the loaded kind. A minute passed, or maybe 20 seconds. Time under a pier does what it wants. Evelyn breathed out through her nose and turned her light on again, a tight beam against the floor. She pinched the camera's battery door closed with her thumb. It clicked like a promise. If her radio was going to stay a dead fish, she would need a different boat. On the way back up, she tucked the pry bar into her belt, slid the case against her side under the jacket, and scooped up the puppy. It trembled but didn't fuss, trusting for reasons that made her eyes sting in a way fog could not explain. At the lip of the hatch, she held still and listened. Nothing but gulls and water and the small metallic fatigue of old nails doing their job for one more morning. She pushed the hatch open an inch at a time, then eased it to the side. Fog met her like a living thing. Her boots found the catwalk. She stood, made herself a closed shape, and waited one more heartbeat for any sound that didn't belong. The boardwalk lay empty, lanes of ghost light and gray. The smear on the planks had dried to a dull line. The photo in her pocket warmed with her body heat, as if it were alive and preferred to be. She slid the hatch back into place without letting it slam, and stood there with the weight of the case hugging her ribs. "Come on," she told the puppy. "We're not doing this alone." They moved along the rail, away from the hatch, away from Pier 7's black mouth. As she reached the safer boards, somewhere behind her, a plank lifted and settled, the kind of quiet that pretends to be the wind. She didn't turn, not yet. She kept walking until the warning tape was a fluttering memory. and the town began again, with a coffee shop venting cinnamon into the cold. At the edge of the marina office, she stopped and looked back once. The fog kept its secrets the way a friend keeps yours, not out of kindness, but out of habit. Above the dark run of the pier, a figure stood still enough to be a post. Then it was only a post. She put her hand on the door handle and felt the case press hard against her ribs, pressing her forward into the day. The marina office was a box of old wood and older coffee. A bell over the door gave a half-hearted ring as Evelyn stepped in with the puppy tucked under one arm and the steel case under the other. A heater rattled in the corner, trying to turn damp into warmth. Behind the counter stood Mara Greer, a widow with wind-burned cheeks and eyes that had learned how to keep a place running after the world stops knocking. She looked from the badge to the dog, to the case, and didn't ask the wrong question first. "You look like you brought in weather," Mara said. "More like it followed me," Evelyn answered. "I need a computer, something that still reads a memory card." Mara tipped her chin to a side room. "Harbor records. It wheezes, but it breathes." They went into a cramped office that smelled like ledger paper and lemon cleaner. A desktop tower sat under a scarred desk, a monitor perched on a stack of tide charts. A thin teenager in a life vest sat with a honey bun and a textbook open like a tent. He looked up, blinked, and straightened. This was Leo, the kid who rented kayaks in summer and shoveled snow from the ramps in winter. He had the careful hands of someone who fixed what he could afford to break. "You good with old machines?" Evelyn asked. Leo wiped sugar from his thumb. "I talk nice to them. They usually talk back." Evelyn set the case down, opened it, and laid out the camera and cards. The puppy stood with its front paws on the chair, sniffing like it was reading a headline. Mara closed the door and pulled the blind, then rested a steadying palm on the top of the monitor like a parishioner at prayer. Leo slid into the chair, powered up the tower, and waded through a boot screen that could have been engraved. "USB still works," he said. "Card slot's cranky. Try the reader." Evelyn handed him the rubber-banded cards. He pushed one into a little plastic reader with the patience of a nurse, then clicked when the drive letter appeared. A folder opened, full of dates Evelyn knew without wanting to. The week of the fire, the week of the funeral, the week the department changed the subject. Leo double-clicked the newest file. The video filled the screen in a gray wash, sharpened and steadied into the evidence bay Jason had recorded. Mara drew in a slow breath through her nose and didn't let it out for a while. They watched Jason pull back the vinyl, watched his hands on the case, heard his whisper close to the mic. In the small room, the sound seemed to warm the air. When the sleeve entered the frame, and the calm voice said, "You're not on schedule, Hale." Mara's hand found the edge of the desk and held it like the wood might drift away. Leo's eyes jumped to Evelyn's face, looking for a cue to panic. She gave him none. The second clip made Leo lean in, the way people do when the past starts placing itself in the present tense. He froze the frame on the reflective jacket, reversed half a second, and stepped through one click at a time while the cursor left little crumbs across the timeline. The logo flared and settled. A circle with a lightning bolt threaded through, the same mark painted on utility trucks that parked where they pleased. The same mark printed on the city's boilerplate work orders, when something needed to be looked at and never spoken of again. "That's the grid vendor," Mara said quietly. "They've got a crew working this end of the pier this morning. Said they were testing lines." "Dispatch told me maintenance was why my radio's junk," Evelyn said. "Convenient." Leo opened a third clip without waiting for permission. Jason's whisper came again, rougher now. If I vanish, check Pier 7, under the hatch. I can't carry this around town." He lifted a dog tag, slid it off his chain, and said, "For Rex." The picture dropped to black like a shut eye. Leo swallowed and looked at the dog by his knee. The puppy stared back, ears pitched forward as if a name had been spoken in a room nobody saw. Mara sank into the spare chair and rubbed the heel of her hand across her brow. "I knew Jason," she said. "He used to come by fall, mornings, and help coil lines for the ferry just to calm his head. Never said much. Brought that old shepherd sometimes. Rex would sit by the heater and guard the sugar packets like they were gold." Evelyn nodded, felt how thin her throat had become, and pointed back at the frozen logo. "Who's the foreman today?" "Calder's on Harborside," Mara said. "But the grid crew runs its own ladder. They sign in with him so the city can pretend there's a line of custody." "Call Calder," Evelyn said. "Tell him I'm coming to see the work order and I want eyes on every man wearing that bolt." Mara reached for the phone, stopped, and glanced at the puppy. It had drifted to the doorway and now stood with its shoulders squared, listening to a corridor she could not hear. Leo muted the speakers. The room grew thinner, like air borrowed by someone else. Boots crossed the outer office. Papers rustled. Someone used the counterbell like they meant it. Mara opened the door and stepped out with the careful cheer people layer over worry. "1 minute," she called, then added, "You're early for the day pass." A male voice answered, pleasant enough to wear to Sunday dinner. "We got bumped ahead. Power audit. I'll just need the access panel keys. Whole place will hum sweeter when we're done." Evelyn slid the camera into her jacket and palmed the card. She put the other 2 cards into her boot like you tuck away an old letter. She told Leo with a look to take the puppy by the collar and not let go. Leo nodded, slow, and reached down. The puppy leaned into his hand. No bark, no growl. Just that lantern-bright focus that made Evelyn feel seen in a way she had not felt since the square on the wall went blank. Mara returned with a clipboard. A man in a reflective jacket followed, hat brim low, the Bolt logo bright against the gray day. He smiled the kind of smile that puts all the teeth in a straight line. "Morning, officer," he said when he saw the badge. "We'll be quick. Just a few test pulls on the lines under 7. "Under 7," Evelyn repeated mildly, like someone trying on a borrowed coat. "What's wrong with under 7? "Nothing if I do my job," he said. He presented the clipboard to Mara without taking his eyes off Evelyn. His hands were clean. His nails were too immaculate for a dock rat. His right sleeve bulged slightly, where a man with a discreet holster keeps his comfort. "Who sent you?" Evelyn asked. "City Utilities," he said, tapping the bolt. "We're in and out. Promise we won't bother your paperwork." Evelyn signed nothing. She stepped close enough to smell laundry soap and a whisper of gun oil. Behind her, Leo moved his foot to block the puppy from walking out. The dog sat, patient as a post, eyes tilted up to the man the way a compass points south when someone has messed with a needle. "Keys stay here," Mara said. "Calder escorts." "Policy changed," the man said, friendly wearing thin. "We're on a tighter clock. Power's twitchy." "Then you can wait 1 minute more," Evelyn said. "I want to see your work order and your supervisor's name." He held her gaze a long beat, then shrugged like a man who knows 10 ways to skin a fish and is bored by all of them. "Suit yourself," he said, and set the clipboard down with a little click. That click came back to Evelyn in the form of the camera's earlier latch, the case's hinge, the hatch's ring. The same neatness, the same quiet mind that enjoys small closures. She smiled like the day had finally given her a favor. "Leo," she said without looking away from the man, "would you be kind and fetch Harbor Master Calder?" "On it," Leo said, voice steady as a dock line. He palmed the puppy's collar and eased backward toward the side door. The man in the jacket shifted his weight. The heater thumped. The fog pressed its face to the office windows like an old friend waiting to be let in. Evelyn let the silence sit until the man felt the need to fill it. People who lie hate quiet. They push words into it just to hear a sound they control. "We'll be at the panel when you're ready," he said finally. "Under 7. Don't take too long." He left the office with a scrape of boot and a pleasant humming that meant nothing to anyone who didn't know what nerves sound like when they are pretending to be attuned. Mara closed the door, locked it, and put both palms flat to the cool wood. "You've got that look," she said to Evelyn. "What look is that?" "The kind that means you're about to walk someone into daylight who prefers the dark." Evelyn checked the card in her jacket one more time. The puppy touched its nose to her knee, then to the case, as if blessing both. Outside, somewhere beyond the fog, the boards of Pier 7 spoke to each other in tiny groans and thought about holding. She took a breath that found all the way down. It tasted like iron and old promises. Harbor Master Calder met them halfway down the dock, hat pulled low, yellow slicker flapping like a flag that hadn't decided which wind to obey. He had the face of a man who'd counted more tides than birthdays, and the calm that comes from knowing wood, water, and people all fail in the same few ways. He glanced at the badge, at the steel case tucked tight under Evelyn's arm, and at the puppy trotting at her heel like a volunteer with short legs. "Morning's gone strange," he said. "Utilities called a line test. Told me to keep folks clear. Said there's a risk of stray current under 7. "Stray current is a good excuse when you don't want company," Evelyn said. "I want eyes on their crew and a look at their work order." Calder nodded once, the way a man nods when he agrees with the sea. "Office has the copy. They signed in. Not the usual boys. Quiet. Too clean." Mara slipped back to her desk to call for the paperwork. Leo shadowed them, the puppy glued to his ankle until it broke off with purpose and nosed hard at Evelyn's pant leg again. Tug. Release. Tug. It pulled her slightly left, toward a maintenance stair that dropped under the decking to a catwalk of crossbeams and utility runs. "Hey," she told the puppy. But it was already headed that way. Nails clicking, head low, tail straight like an arrow. She followed because that had become the rule of the morning, and because every rule worth following starts with a small insistence no one else hears. Calder caught up, frowning. "Under there is off limits until I clear the panel with their lead." "Then walk me to the door," Evelyn said. "If the panel's fine, we'll be in and out. If it's not, we need to see that with our own eyes." He didn't argue. He led them to a steel hatch in the dock face, half hidden by a hanging skirt of old net and a sign that promised fines and disappointments to trespassers. He spun a wheel, wrestled a reluctant latch, and hauled the door open. A square of dim light gave way to a tunnel that smelled like damp rope and old pennies. The puppy dove in with a soft grunt, confident as a priest in his own church. They ducked low and moved single file along the narrow run. Water slapped the pilings in an easy rhythm. The grid vendor's bolts and brackets lined the wall like a row of polite teeth. A hum lived in the metal, not loud enough to call noise, but present, like a note someone once struck and forgot to let go. The puppy stopped where the tunnel widened and pressed its nose to a grated deck panel. Through the grate, Evelyn saw a squat metal cabinet bolted to the underside of the pier, tags swinging from its latches. Calder tapped a gauge with the back of his knuckle. "No live load here. he said. "They're not pulling. They're waiting." "For what?" Evelyn asked. The puppy answered by swinging its head toward a low crawl space just beyond the cabinet, a place for cables and bad decisions. It wriggled through and disappeared with a soft scritch. Evelyn knelt, flipped up the grate, and slid herself after it, shoulders scraping wood and rust. The space opened enough to kneel. Her light found the puppy braced with its front paws on a long, flat case shoved up under the joists with a wedge of drifted boards. The case matched the one in Jason's video right down to the tasteful scratches some men call character. "Calder," she said, voice steady. "Back me up." He crouched beside her, face like carved maple. "That's not ours. Help me slide it." They worked it free, careful hands, careful breaths. The rubber feet left clean tracks in the dust, recent, deliberate. Evelyn turned the latches. Inside foam, snugs, and the cold order of a mind that liked neat endings. The first layer held tools. The second held a compact box with a face like a kitchen timer if kitchens were mean. A digital readout slept behind a cloudy window, wires tucked underneath like polite snakes. Calder swore, quiet and heartfelt. "That's a grief maker." Before Evelyn could answer, footsteps rang above them, the hollow clop of boots choosing their weight. A voice slid down through the boards, practiced friendly. "Calder, you down there? I need your sign-off to start the pull." Calder looked at Evelyn. She shook her head. He stayed silent. The puppy backed into her shin, watching the shadow move past in 3 gray stripes as a man crossed the overhead slats and stopped directly above the cabinet. A pause. A small click, too crisp for a dock. Somebody testing a latch. Then the footsteps carried on. Slow, as if the man had to remind his legs how to walk when he wanted to run. Evelyn leaned close to the device. The timer was dark but warm. She touched the housing, felt the faintest vibration under her glove. The purr of electronics idling. A cable ran from the box into the cabinet and out to the pier's underbelly where the wood went black with age. Not a power test, a trigger. The thought came whole and simple, the way a good truth does. "Rowan's crew," she murmured, and then bit back the name. Saying a thing makes it too real for some rooms. Calder gestured to the readout. "Battery backfed. Kill main. It still ticks." "Then the only safe switch is a long swim," she said. "We won't get it far before it asks for our names." She closed the lid, set her palm on top, and felt the choice rise. You call bomb squad. You back out. You wait on a periphery while someone in a suit decides if your life is worth their mourning. Or you do the dumb smart thing because the timing's wrong and the faces upstairs belong to men who think fires are answers. The puppy pawed the case and gave a low bark. Not fear, not complaint. It sounded like a vote. "Help me," she told Calder. "We'll take it to the waterline and drop." "That's 50 pounds wet," he said. 70 if your luck runs like mine. "Then we lift with our legs," she said, and hooked her hands under the case. Calder did the same. Together, they levered it along the graded shelf, inch by careful inch, until the opening to the lake sat 3 arms lengths ahead, a rectangle of pale water and moving fog. They slid, they breathed. The puppy trotted alongside, focused like a surgeon. Above them, boards creaked. A man's shadow paused again, then withdrew, then returned. Uncertainty makes people heavier. Evelyn counted their breaths to keep hers from measuring fear. They reached the lip. The water below rocked gently. A mother who didn't know what was in the cradle. Evelyn looked at Calder. He looked back, gave a once-in-a-lifetime smile, a small, crooked thing that said he would not be anywhere else. And they heaved together. The case cleared the edge. A voice behind them said, "I'll take that, officer." Evelyn turned. The beam from her light brushed the doorway and found a tall man balanced on the threshold of the crawlspace like he owned the geometry. Reflective stripes, bolt on the chest, hat brim low. He took off the hat with the politeness of a bank manager and revealed a face she knew in her bones. Lieutenant Rowan looked exactly as he always had. Hair careful, eyes careful, mouth soft around the edges, as if he were perpetually about to say something reassuring. "You shouldn't be under here," he said. "Stray current, liability." "Then we'll leave," she said. "After we put this where it can't hurt your schedule." "You don't have the manual for that toy," he said, almost tender. "It's more delicate than it looks. Let me handle it." The puppy stepped forward, a low growl taking shape like a storm line. Rowan's gaze flicked down, not amused. "Where'd you pick up the mutt?" he asked. "It picked me," Evelyn said. Rowan's right hand rested against his jacket where his sleeve bulged. "Calder," he said without looking away from Evelyn. "City thanks you for cooperation. You can head up." "Harbor stays with Harbor," Calder said, voice granite. Rowan sighed through his nose, a sound he made in meetings when he wanted folks to feel like the adult had arrived. "I'm disappointed," he said. "You could have stayed out of this. We had the noise handled. Now there'll be more noise." Evelyn shifted her weight until her heel found the great solid bar. "Funny word," she said. "Noise." "Better than truth," he said softly. "Truth tips boats." He moved then, quick and smooth, hand sliding inside the jacket. The puppy launched. Teeth met wrist, the meaty pad under the thumb. Precision born in a bloodline that had done this work long before an office ever gave it a name. Rowan hissed and swung, gun clearing leather, muzzle flaring toward the box at the lip. "Down!" Evelyn shouted. Calder threw his shoulder against the case. Weight gave way, gravity did its ancient job, and the metal slid through fog and vanished into green. A heartbeat of silence. Then the lake jumped and coughed a column of white. The world went noise and water and flying splinters, a punch of air that lifted them and set them down wrong. The light went out. The hum died. Rowan's shape blurred, staggered, then was gone from the doorway, replaced by smoke and the stink of cooked metal. Evelyn's ears rang the way old church bells do after a wedding. She tasted salt and iron. The puppy was on her chest, wet and shaking, eyes round with electricity that had nothing to do with wires. Calder hauled her by the collar into the tunnel proper, while debris pattered down like bad hail. Somewhere far away, a siren decided to be brave. They crawled until there was room to stand, and then they stood wrong and pretended it was fine. Up through the hatch, into air that felt punched clean, onto planks glittered with mist. People shouted in the white distance. Mara's voice cut through with a dockyard contralto, built to move boats and men. Leo's feet hammered the boards, then slowed when he saw everyone breathing. Evelyn wiped water and ash from her face with the heel of her hand and looked back toward the gap in the decking where the maintenance door coughed steam. No Rowan. Just his reflective strip torn loose and stapled to a nail by fate. A small, mean streak of red marked the threshold and made its own way toward the stairs like a man who didn't ask permission. "Harbor Master," she said, as if they were in a meeting and this was the minute for decisions, "lock every gate. Nobody in or out without your eyes on them." Calder touched the radio at his shoulder and barked orders that moved, the way true things move on water. Evelyn knelt, checked the puppy's paws, ears, eyes, the tiny brave heart under its ribs. It licked her knuckles with solemn care and leaned into her like forgiveness. Above them, the fog thinned enough to show a slice of winter sun. The pier creaked, considering its choices. Far down the boardwalk, a reflective jacket cut through the haze and vanished into the service alley by the House of Power. Evelyn stood. The case was gone. The thing inside it had done its worst. Something worse had climbed out in its place. "All right," she told the morning. "Your turn, Jason. I'm still listening." Sirens found the pier at last, thin at first, then stacking until the whole waterfront seemed to breathe in time with them. Steam rolled off the water where the case had gone under and blown itself into weather. The smell of burned metal kept its grip. Evelyn wiped grit from her teeth and scanned for movement that wasn't panic. She found a ribbon of red where Rowan had brushed the threshold, a thin line that slipped away into the service alley like a snake that knew shortcuts. "Calder, lock the north gate," she said. "Send a deckhand to the south stairs with eyes open. Nobody slips a skiff without your say-so." He was already moving, voice cracking across the radio, men answering by name. Mara hustled from the marina office with a first aid kit in one hand and a flashlight in the other. "You bleeding?" she asked, not waiting for ceremony. "Not mine," Evelyn said. "He's hit. Not bad enough to make him slow if he's scared." The puppy shook lake water from its ears and took a sharp scent off the boards. It went taut, nose to the deck, tail steady. It tugged her pant leg once, a quick talk we've learned, then headed down the alley between the House of Power and the bait shop. Evelyn followed, heater coil heat still singing against her skin where the blast had slapped her. The alley held the kind of cold that doesn't like being named. Dumpsters leaned against chain link. A gull stared in through a break in the fence with a look that said it had seen worse. The puppy paused at a smear of red across a bent knee of conduit, then veered right toward a steel door with a card reader and a paper sign that said, "Authorized personnel only," as if paper had ever stopped sin. The card reader wore a strip of fresh tape, the kind crews slap on when a door won't behave. Evelyn put her shoulder into it. The door gave as if it had been waiting for an excuse. Inside, the House of Power hummed into her bones. Transformers do not shout. They occupy a room until your own heart falls into their habit. Catwalks latticed above banked machines. Colored tape marked lanes only the city remembered. The air tasted like pennies and thunder. The puppy's nails ticked on concrete. It led her past a row of panels to a second door left on its latch. Beyond it, the maintenance corridor narrowed, low enough to make a tall man bow out of respect. A drop of blood clung to a conduit elbow, then let go and fell in slow motion, leaving a tiny comet tail on gray paint. Evelyn stopped, listened, raised 2 fingers to hush the dog that didn't need hushing. Somewhere ahead, fabric whispered against metal. The sound of a man trying to shrink. She moved until she could see a slice of the next room. It was a workshop. Pegboards with tools outlined in marker, a rolling stool on its side, a coffee mug with a ring of old sugar glued to its lip. The far door bled daylight in a long knife. A shadow crossed the bright, paused, and came back. She smelled laundry soap again, clean even under diesel and dust. Rowan was here, and he was angry at the day for getting ideas. Evelyn stayed in the seam where the corridor met the room and spoke in a voice made of sand and patience. "Lieutenant," she said, "medical's on its way. Nobody has to be a headline if you sit down." Rowan's voice slid back with that easy Sunday tone, thinned by pain. "You always were good with people, Hart. Shame you learned it in the wrong church. You fired on an officer," she said. "You built a bomb under a public pier." "I managed risk," he said. "You set it free. That's the trouble with rookies. They keep thinking the box is meant to be opened." A tool shifted on the pegboard. The puppy's growl vibrated against her boot. Evelyn pictured the room the way a person does when they can't afford a mistake. Pegboard to the left, rolling stool a yard inside the threshold, a bench under the window, a blue crate that would bark if you kicked it. The far door cracked to daylight, a draft drawing fog in like breath. If Rowan wanted out, he had to pass that door or crawl into the guts of the building and hope rats respected rank. She showed her hands and stepped into the doorway, just enough to count his options with her eyes. He stood by the bench, jacket sleeve wet where the dog had found him. Gun low, muzzle angled casual at the floor, in a way that let him raise it without thinking. Color had drained from his face, leaving a high, unhealthy shine over the cheekbones. He looked at home, and that was the worst of it. "You're bleeding," she said. "You're in my office," he said. "Let's trade obvious." "You can still stop," she said. "From here?" He smiled the soft, practiced smile he saved for grieving families when he wanted them to take the folded flag and stop asking for more. "You don't get to turn this ship. There are tides you don't chart." He moved. She moved faster, not with a gun, but with a hand to the wall, palm smacking a red paddle under a sign that had always been ignored. Overhead, sprinkler pipes coughed once, like old men clearing their throats. Then rigs hidden in the ceiling woke and gave the room hard rain. It hit steel, concrete, gun oil, and his face. He flinched a fraction, just enough to shift the muzzle off the line of her heart. The puppy launched low, a streak of wet purpose. It hit Rowan's shin and held, weight and teeth conspiring like good partners. Rowan's gun cracked. The round gouged the cinder block and screamed copper. Evelyn drove off her heel, took his wrist with both hands, the old academy move you practice 1,000 times and hope to never use. He tried to pivot out, got nowhere with the dog attached. The gun spilled to the floor and skittered under the rolling stool. Rowan swore, short and sincere. He tore free by sacrificing fabric, leaving a flap of jacket in the dog's mouth, and went straight at the daylight door. Evelyn kicked the stool hard. It shot on its back like a hockey puck, clipped his shin, and bought a heartbeat more. She went for the gun under the stool and came up wet and focused. By the time she cleared the doorway, he had gained the ramp and the outside and the open spine of the marina where small boats sat like gossipers. Calder's men had closed the big gates, but a rowboat remained flipped on the bank, oars tied under its bench with the kind of knot a man learns from bad company. Rowan cut the rope clean with a utility blade, shoved the hull, and slid it into the narrow canal that ran behind the powerhouse into the main water. He was strong, and fear makes men stronger. The boat took the water like it had been asked politely. Evelyn raised the pistol, eyes on the oarlock, the clean shot you do not take when there are houses inside the ricochet. She tracked him instead and spoke into her shoulder mic, knowing it was probably dead. "Unit at the powerhouse," she said anyway, because sometimes you do a thing to remind yourself who you are. "Officer pursuing suspect by water. Male, 40s, reflective jacket with Bolt logo, right wrist injured." The puppy stood at the lip of the ramp, wet fur making him look like a toy brushed wrong. It whined once, then took off along the walkway that paralleled the canal. Short legs hustling, head level, eyes burning with a job it had found and would not put down. Evelyn ran with it. Footsteps thundered behind her as Calder's crew gave chase in their own way, whistling to each other like old birds. Rowan dug in on the oars and found his reach. He put his head down and rowed like a man who had trained his whole life to leave messes behind. The canal pinched at a culvert where a chain-link gate sat unlocked because nothing bad had ever happened there in memory anyone admitted to. He shot under it and out into the wider main, where the lake spread itself like a tale warned about in church. They lost him to open water, Not far, but far enough. Harbor patrol boats were still cutting their engines warm. A siren on the road paused exactly where no siren should have to pause and argued with a red light. Evelyn slowed, lungs tight, eyes on a slick of fresh blood, rolling thin on the water where the oar had rubbed his wrist. It swirled into a pattern the lake did not plan to keep. Mara's hand landed on her shoulder. I called the city. That didn't help, so I called somebody else. Who? Internal Affairs, Mara said. A woman named Noor. She sounded like bad news for liars. Said she was already in the car. Good, Evelyn said. The word felt like solid ground. Behind them, Leo skidded to a stop, cheeks pink, eyes huge. Officer Hart, he panted. Before it all blew, the grid guy from the office left a clipboard. I thought it was just sheets, but the bottom is a fake. There's a hollow, look. He held out the board. Evelyn took it, ran a thumb along the edge, and found the seam. A little push, and the backing slid open to reveal a flat compartment, taped out with patience. Inside lay 2 thumb drives, in silver heat shrink, a folded note the size of a candy wrapper, and a dog tag dark with age. She opened the note. The handwriting was the kind men learn by filling out forms all their lives. Neat, square, unafraid of boxes. If I vanish, it said, give this to someone who still listens. And then a single word underlined once, the way you underline a name on a cast. Rex. The puppy nosed the edge of the tag and made a small sound in its throat that was not a whine and not a bark. It sounded like recognition. Evelyn closed her fingers over the metal. The lake slapped a piling, counting time. We hold the pier, she said. We hold the office. We hold the story until Noor gets here. Calder nodded. Men took posts because that is what men do when someone says the simple, true thing at the right time. Mara pressed a towel into Evelyn's hands, and then another into the puppy's ridiculous, wet ruff. Leo stood on his toes and peered down the canal like he could will a boat to make a mistake. Evelyn turned the drives in her palm, light catching on plastic like it catches on good luck. Somewhere out beyond the culvert, a small motor coughed to life where no motor was supposed to be. Rowan had found a friend, or a friend had found him. Either way, the day had decided to get longer. She slipped the drives into an inside pocket, put the tag against her ribs next to Jason's ID, and felt the weight add up to something that could no longer be pushed aside. The puppy looked up at her, blinked lake water out of its lashes, and put one damp paw on her boot. It wasn't a tug this time. It was a promise. All right, she said to the fog and the water and the man who thought truth could be drowned. We'll finish it when she arrives. Noor arrived in a gray sedan that looked like it paid its own taxes. She stepped out with a leather case and a look you don't practice. You earn it one lie at a time. She was small, all edges filed smooth, the kind of calm that makes other people check their pockets. Evelyn met her at the gate with the clipboard, the thumb drives, and the dog at her heel like a word you are not finished saying. Officer Hart, Noor said, as if they had been scheduled all along. Walk me through it once without poetry. Evelyn did. Pier 7, the hatch, the case, the cards, the reflective logo, the blast. She kept it short and straight. Noor listened with her head tilted like she could hear where the truth changed keys. When Evelyn finished, Noor held out her hand for the drives. She did not handle them like glass. She handled them like facts. They set up in the marina office because the powerhouse smelled too much like thunder and bad choices. Mara made coffee that could stand up by itself. Leo hovered just outside the door with the puppy, who had decided the threshold was a good job and took it seriously. Calder leaned against the frame, arms folded, soaking in every word like brine. Noor jacked the first drive into a government laptop that booted without flair. Folders, logs, video that had never been meant for public light. She opened a file, and the room shifted half an inch, the way a building does when a heavy truck rolls by. Rowan's voice came on careless and familiar, clipped from a phone held too close. Chain of custody shortcuts called triage, off-book handoffs called discretion, a calendar invite to a doc nobody logged. Faces slid past in the reflections of blacked-out windows, men with generic hair and the same small watches. Contractors, Noor said, eyes on the screen. Grid vendor as a housekeeping service. They scrub the scene. The bolt on the jacket is not a costume. It's a pass. She opened the second drive. Here the files were clinical, inventories rewritten. A letterhead template for evidence consolidation, a list of items stamped destroyed without a judge's hand. And then Jason's voice again, recorded quick in a stairwell, breath shallow but steady. If I vanish, give this to someone who still listens. For Rex. Mara's hand touched the puppy's head. He brought Rex in here once, she said softly, to the dog as much as to Noor. Sat by the heater, guarded sugar like it mattered. Calder cleared his throat, an old ship turning. I have something, he said, and fished a folded printout from his slicker pocket. Came to the harbor email the week before the warehouse blast. It sat in spam like a drowned rat. I pulled it last night to ask Jason if he'd sent it, and then the world got busy. He handed it to Noor. The sender line read from a generic account. The body was simple. If a shepherd pup finds you at dawn, walk it to Pier 7. Under the hatch. Don't call first. Noor read it twice, then looked at the puppy with something close to respect. The dog? Rex's bloodline, Mara said. There's a breeder 2 towns over who trains for service and rescue. Jason used to buy his food there. The woman knows which litters belong to which dogs like she, knows the veins on her own hands. Week ago, a stranger paid cash for a pup, asked me to hold him for Officer Hart without leaving a number. He said the pup would know when. Evelyn felt it in her ribs. A soft knock from the place grief keeps a room. He planned for silence, she said. He planned for the day when nobody would pick up a phone. Noor's cell buzzed on the desk, a tight-beat ringtone that didn't apologize. She answered, said her name, listened. Put him on ice, she said, and hung up. To the room. State troopers stopped your lieutenant at a storage yard off Route 12. He was feeding a drum fire. A case of thumb drives turned to tar at his feet. Burns on the right wrist. He asked for a lawyer and an aspirin. She lifted one shoulder. He gets the first. The second depends on triage. The room let out a breath it had been holding since sunrise. Not relief. Not yet. But the shape of the day changed from a chase to a reckoning. Noor copied the drives to an evidence vault and labeled them like she had been burned by missing labels before. She photographed the clipboard's hidden compartment, the dog tag, the card from Jason's neck. She took down names with a pen that made no noise. Outside, the fog thinned to a pale veil, and the lake remembered how to be a lake. Men went back to tasks, with hands that trembled a little. Someone laughed at something small, and then stopped because the sound surprised him. Life keeps insisting. By afternoon, a Plain City crew hammered new boards over the hole, under the maintenance hatch. Calder stood by with folded arms and a look that learned 3 languages of stubborn in 1 hour. The puppy lay at Evelyn's boots like a comma in a long sentence, rising and falling with her breath. Noor stepped out and shut the office door behind her with ceremony you could miss if you were young. "This will get loud," she said. "Internal, external, media. You'll be told to wait, to let process be process." "I know the song," Evelyn said. "Sing anyway," Noor said. She studied the dog, then the water. "I'm not sentimental, Officer Hart. But if you hadn't followed a tug on your pants this morning, I'd be boxing up a very different story right now." "That wasn't me," Evelyn said. "That was him." She tipped her chin at the little shepherd. He cocked his head as if the praise might be a trick. Dusk gathered early, as it will on a day that has done too much. The harbor lights winked on, one by one, like tired eyes learning night again. Mara set a small cake on the counter, because there was always a reason to mark the living. And if you wait for a perfect one, you never light a candle. It was not anyone's birthday. It still counted. Evelyn took the dog tag from her pocket and turned it over in her hand. The edges were smooth from years against a man's chest. The name was half-worn but true. She walked out to the bench that faced Pier 7, the one Caldwell had sanded and varnished every spring since the year his wife died, and laid the tag on the slat as if returning a library book. She set Jason's ID beside it for a moment, then slid the ID back into her pocket because the living still need their names. Mara joined her with 2 paper cups of coffee. "You going to keep him?" she asked, eyes on the water. "He keeps finding me," Evelyn said. "Seems only fair I stand still." "What will you call him?" Evelyn looked down at the pup. He watched her like a man listening for a verdict. "Jason said a name in a clip," she said. "If I don't make it, Echo will remember the way." She stood, the ache in her shoulders making argument. "Echo," she said aloud, testing the shape of it. The ears twitched, the head tipped. The small tail made a careful, uncertain sweep, like a letter written by a child who has just learned curves. Evelyn laughed once, a short, surprised sound that put warmth back in the air. "Echo it is," she said, and the dog sat with the gravity of an oath. Her phone buzzed with a number that meant headquarters. She let it go to voicemail. Across the lot, Noor spoke into a radio in the tone of a person aligning gears that had been grinding under varnish. A patrol car eased in silent and took up a corner like a bookend. The day began to file itself. When the last light above the bait shop flickered on, Noor walked over with a folder and the kind of nod that contains more than one meaning. "Rowan's in custody. He'll say he was cleaning backlog, that you panicked, that the shoreline is full of ghosts. He'll wear his soft voice until a jury wants to stop hearing it. These drives will have to sing in tune." "They will," Evelyn said. She looked at the lake, at the boards, at the hatch that would never be just a hatch again. Some truths wait in silence. "And then?" Noor asked, not unkind. "Then loyalty brings them home," Evelyn said. She reached for Echo's collar, and he leaned into her hand with the trusting weight of a creature that has already decided morning will come. Later, after statements and signatures and the small humiliations that keep institutions upright, Evelyn walked back to the bench with a brass plate in her pocket. Calder had found a man who owed him a favor. The plate read simply, "For those who kept watch when the rest of us slept." She screwed it into the wood with a stubby driver while Echo sat guard, watching the dark like a professional. When she finished, the town had gone quiet except for a bar TV arguing with itself and the patient knock of water against pilings. Evelyn sat, set her hat beside her, and felt the kind of tired you can live with. Echo climbed up, planted himself awkwardly across her boots, and sighed the big sigh of a small dog finally allowed to stop moving. A phone chimed. Noor again. One line only. He asked for you by name. Evelyn typed back, "Tell him we listened." She put the phone away, scratched the spot behind Echo's ear that made his back foot thump, and looked out where fog and starlight had decided to share the night. Some secrets are meant to be hidden. Others are buried because someone hopes we'll stop digging. She had a case for each pocket and a dog who would not let her forget which was which. The lake breathed. The bench took her weight. Echo settled. Morning would be different when it got here, but it would get here. That was the part everyone kept underestimating. If this story pulled at something inside you, that quiet mix of loyalty, mystery, and hope, drop a simple 1 in the comments so I know you were here till the end. Your little tap means more than you think. And if you'd like to walk beside me through more true-to-heart tales like this one, hit subscribe and stay close. The next story's already waiting, somewhere in the fog.